Hey everybody. A small single-engine plane being ferried from St. Paul to Portugal went down off the coast of Newfoundland yesterday, and as of now, the pilot still hasn't been found. My name is Kerry McCauley, and welcome to my channel. Now this crash really hits home for a number of reasons. First of all, as a ferry pilot, I've flown this exact route many times. The route this pilot was taking was South St. Paul to Bangor, Maine, from there to St. John's, Newfoundland, and his next leg was going to be the 1,500-mile ocean leg from St. John's to Santa Maria in the Azores. And like I said, I've flown this exact route dozens of times in small single-engine airplanes. St. Paul was actually where I started my career as a ferry pilot. The company I worked for, Orient Air, had a hangar in South St. Paul, right where this plane took off from. And so I know exactly where this pilot was going and what he was doing. Now, if you look at ForeFlight, it's kind of interesting. When he left St. Paul, he originally flew eastbound, heading toward Bangor, Maine. He literally flew right over my drop zone, my small grass strip where I have a skydiving school. And this was Friday morning, and I was actually there Friday morning. And he flew past us and then turned around and flew back to St. Paul, which is unusual. He made it almost all the way back to St. Paul before turning around yet again and flying back on to Bangor. Now, I'm not really sure why he did this. It's possible he was testing the ferry tank system in the plane. Often you do that when you're going to go on a long ferry flight. You're going to test it out, and so that's maybe what he did. Or possibly he had something wrong with the plane, some kind of issue, and then resolved it before having to land in St. Paul and continuing on. I've actually done that as well. But he literally flew right over me. I was there that morning, probably pre-flight in the airplane when he flew past. The aircraft he was flying was an Air Tractor AT-802 equipped with Whipline 1000 scooping floats called the Fireboss. The plane's designed for firefighting, and the Fireboss is an amazing airplane. It's powered by a 1,600 horsepower Pratt & Whitney PT6. The Fireboss can carry 800 gallons of water in its hopper, which I'm guessing was modified to carry additional fuel for this ferry flight, because that's what they do. They seal up the hopper and use it for extra fuel to make that long 1,500-mile leg over the ocean. The Whipline 1000 floats were originally designed for the Twin Otter, so they're pretty big for such a small airplane. Now, the pilot departed St. John's yesterday morning and climbed up to 6,500 feet. And he only got 120 miles out from St. John's when ATC got an SOS call, followed shortly by an emergency beacon. Now, we're not sure if the beacon was the plane's ELT, which is mounted in the plane and goes off automatically on impact, or if it was an EPIRB triggered by the pilot. But Canadian Search and Rescue was notified immediately. They got out there right away. And unfortunately, all they were able to find was a small oil slick, some debris, and one of the plane's floats. And even more unfortunately, they found an empty life raft. Now, seeing the plane was only 120 miles out from St. John's, running out of fuel was probably not the option. That's usually what you're mostly concerned with on this leg, but he was just, not even an hour into the flight, so that's probably not the problem. So that leaves two causes, mechanical or weather. Possibly mechanical. Maybe he had a problem with the engine, although these PT6 turbine engines are pretty reliable, but anything's possible. But the weather is probably more likely. Now, if you look here on FlightAware, we've got the track that the pilot was going to fly. He was making the 1,500-mile leg all the way down to Santa Maria. But when he took off from St. John's, he had this area of, looks like precipitation of some sort to get through. Now, I pulled up some of the forecasts yesterday a little bit, and it looked like there was a lot of icing forecast here, and the surface, the freezing level was pretty much down to the surface. So icing is a definite possibility in this case. He only made it like 120 miles, and I don't know if this band of weather you're seeing here on FlightAware is real time from when it happened. It could have been a lot closer. And if you're going to be flying this Air Tractor in any kind of ice, you're going to be in trouble in a hurry, because the Air Tractor is not certified for flight in known ice. It doesn't have de-ice boots or hot props or hot windshield. And with all that surface area of the struts and the floats to pick up ice, that plane will get iced up in a hurry. And even though it has a 1,600 horsepower engine, which is just a beast, this is the largest single engine plane out there. It could carry a lot of ice, I imagine, but not an unlimited amount. So flying in icing conditions would be a real bad idea. Like I mentioned, I've flown this route dozens of times in small single engine airplanes. And I've always wished that I was in a float plane when I was on these trips. I mean, I thought it would be pretty handy to be able to land on the water in case you had some kind of a problem and wait for rescue. But one thing I never really thought of, at least at first, was a float plane doesn't do you any good if you can't get the plane down safely. And to do that, you have to have the right conditions. And it doesn't sound like this pilot had very good conditions at all. Now, first of all, they reported that it was pretty windy, and that means waves. I'm not surprised if they had 10, 15-foot swells, and putting a float plane down in really high swells is going to be difficult under the best of circumstances as far as visibility goes, and it doesn't sound like he had that either. Now, they reported 200 to 300-foot ceilings, which means, if the pilot lost an engine or he was iced up, he's going to be trying to control this airplane on instruments through the clouds. He'll break out of the clouds with just seconds to spare before setting up for landing. And that's going to be a problem, because one of the biggest things of a successful landing on the water with a float plane or ditching is how you're set up on the ocean. I mean, you want to set up parallel to the swells if you can, to land on top of the swell or maybe down in the trough. If you're coming in perpendicular to the swells, you've got to time it so you're landing on the back side of a swell, which what you really don't want to do is land on the upside of a swell. That'd be just like running into the side of a hill. And if you break out with just 2 or 3 seconds before impact, you're just not going to have any time to make any kind of turns or adjustment to how you're going to land. So it's not surprising that he came down really hard and ripped a float off. Now, the other problem you might have had is, like I mentioned, if he was iced up. If you got that plane iced up and he's coming down because he's just too heavy, it doesn't really matter what kind of situation he's in when he breaks out of the clouds. He's going to hit really hard. So not surprising he broke a float off and had a really hard landing. Now, seeing they found his life raft outside the aircraft and inflated leads me to guess that he probably survived the landing and was somehow able to get outside the plane, because these life rafts are not self-inflating, at least the ones I've used in the past. And they're relatively hard to get open. Well, not hard, but you have to tear open a big Velcro patch and get a hold of the lanyard and pull it hard. So they don't really open automatically. So most likely he got out of the plane. But just getting out of the plane and getting your raft inflated is only half the job. I've gone through the Icelandic Oceanic Survival Course in Reykjavik twice, and there we practiced opening and inflating the rafts, swimming in the survival suit, and climbing into the raft. And let me tell you, that's a lot harder than you would think. I mean, it was difficult getting into it even in the calm waters of the harbor, and then they took us out into the ocean, but even there, the waves were only 2 or 3 feet high, and it was pretty difficult to get into the raft. So doing that in 8 to 10 foot swells has got to be a lot more difficult. Another thing you have to consider is he landed hard enough to rip a float off the plane. So that's a pretty hard landing. There's a relatively good chance he was injured in the crash. So just getting out of the plane and getting the raft inflated, again, is going to be made more difficult if you're injured. He might not have been able to get into the raft at all. Another thing that they always stressed to us in that course was never, ever let go of the raft, because they catch the wind really easy. And if it gets blown out of your grasp, even a couple of feet, you're never going to catch it. They told us even if you're Michael Phelps, you will not be able to swim fast enough to catch a raft that's being blown by the wind, especially if you're in your survival suit. Now, as of now, they still haven't found the pilot. They're still out looking for him, and hopefully he is in a survival suit, which will give him a lot more time. When I was in that course, we were in survival suits in the water for quite a long time, and I was really impressed at how well they keep you warm. I mean, they're 1/4-inch neoprene, and they keep you dry inside, so you've got some time. But they did say 6, maybe 12 hours is usually the max, and it's been over that, so it's not looking really good. And now this whole accident has given me one other thing to be worried about when I'm ferry flying. Now, I've always been worried about the ocean conditions or the weather conditions as far as icing and thunderstorms go, but I didn't really give a lot of thought to how low the ceilings were over the ocean. Like I mentioned, it's tough to set up for a successful ditching. I've never done it personally, but I've talked to, I think, three pilots now that I've ditched successfully, and they all had relatively good ceilings, giving them time to set up for the ditching, to time their landing in the swells. But if the ceilings are really low, like this pilot had 200 to 300 foot ceilings, you're not going to have any time to set up for successful ditching. So next time I go, I'm going to be definitely paying attention to that as well. Okay, well, that's all I've got for now. Like I said, they're still looking for the pilot. It's not looking good, but hey, miracles happen. So let's keep them in our thoughts and prayers, okay? All right, that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching. And as always, don't forget to keep your speed up.